Just because I didn't spend the price of a nice car on my hi-fi system doesn't mean it sucks. But that doesn't mean it wouldn't be better if I had spent that much. Welcome to Lancaster Hi-Fi. I'm Stephen Lancaster. Let's talk about high-end audio. Is it worth it? If you don't spend the high prices, does that mean your system sucks? You know, that kind of thing. I'm not drinking scotch tonight. I'm drinking a 2023 Pinot from Willamette Valley Vineyards. Whole cluster Pinot Noir. And I'm drinking it out of I know, it's a ceramic glass. My wife got rid of all our crystal. What are you going to do? 'Cause my wife's a hippie. Cheers. Bit of barnyard. I like that in a Pinot. It's good wine. All right, let's talk about hi-fi. Is high-end audio worth it? Are you wasting your money if you spend a lot on your hi-fi? Conversely, does your system suck? Is your system shit if you don't spend a lot on it? Yes, high-end audio is worth it. You get what you pay for. The worth it thing is totally personal, because it goes from, well, I don't even have the money to spend on that. It's definitely not worth going into debt for. So no, it's not worth it if you don't have the money to spend. If you do have the money to spend, is it worth it? Well, it depends on how much you like hi-fi and how much time you spend listening. I mean, if it's just a conversation piece, then that's silly. But if hi-fi is something that you spend a lot of time with and you have developed a discerning ear, then yeah, you get what you pay for. And then the worth it part is personal. Is your system if you don't spend a lot of money on it? No, of course not. You can get some really nice sound. You can get a lot of enjoyment out of gear that doesn't cost a lot of money. And I ought to know, because I have not spent much money at all on any of my gear. Like this system that I spend the most time listening to, I've said this before, $200 for the speakers. I got this in high school. I contributed $50. Preamp and tube amp I both got for free, although I've worked on both of them. So, I mean, I've put money and time into them. CD player, which I spent under $200 on. I spend a lot more money on records. I got a lot of records. And I think that's appropriate. Spend money on what you enjoy. And I do enjoy records, so I spend a lot more money on records than I do on hi-fi. This is not to say I don't put any time and effort into hi-fi. I've got quite the system that I've put a lot of effort into. And I've got systems throughout the house that I've put a lot of effort into. They're not They're also not high-end in the sense that high-end is... All right. What are you paying for? I mean, maybe that's the more pressing question. What are you paying for when you spend a lot on hi-fi? Let's be clear. To some degree, you're spending some money on cachet, on bragging rights. There is that element, right? There's aesthetics and bragging rights and cachet, various versions of, say, the Marantz tax or the Macintosh tax, brands that have big names, and you want to have a piece of that, and you'll spend the money just to get a piece of that thing that's cool. And I'm not putting it down. Let's just be honest about it, though. I want a Macintosh. I want an Audio Research. Part of the reason I want one of those is because I know that they're going to sound really good. But I'd be lying if I said that part of it wasn't the cachet of those brand names. But if I'm going to choose between a Macintosh, an Audio Research, a Conrad Johnson, well, a lot of people have heard of Macintosh, so I definitely get way more sort of cool points, I guess, with my friends for that one. Fewer people have heard of Audio Research, but maybe they're better. I don't know. It's probably a toss-up. A lot of people say Conrad Johnson's a lot better than either one of those. Not that many people have heard of that, especially not outside a hi-fi world, the hi-fi world. But if I were able to try nice preamps by all three of those brands, I would choose the one I liked best. But I'm not saying it's an awful thing to get something because of its reputation. One of the reasons you get something because of its reputation is because if it has a reputation for being excellent and you get that thing, then that does alleviate you of some of the shopping around and research that you would have had to otherwise do. It makes it easier to make a decision if you go with Macintosh. You know it's not going to suck. It makes it easier if you go with Audio Research. You know it's not going to suck. So, that's some of what you're paying for. With Macintosh, you're paying for a brand that's been made in the USA since the 50s. And they service what they sell. They certify repair techs that work on their stuff. You can get a replacement faceplate for a Mac that was made in the 60s. And that's worth something. That is worth something. You get a piece of Mac gear, it's not going to become an orphan. Knock wood. Now, you're not just paying for a big name and the longevity of a company and so on. You're paying for quality components. What are these quality components? Are they so super awesome? And I would say in some cases, I am fully on board with higher quality components. In other cases, I don't know. Let me start with the I don't know. I don't know for myself whether high-end capacitors are much better than WEMA capacitors, for example. I don't know that a Mundorf capacitor is going to be that much better than a WEMA MKP capacitor. I just don't. I've heard it said that the Mundorf is a lot better and other high-end capacitors are a lot better, but I haven't heard it for myself, and Mundorf and them don't put out data sheets to show that their stuff's better, and that turns me off, but I don't know. So that's sort of in the I don't know part, and along with other components such as wire wound versus metal film resistors or carbon composite resistors. Carbon composite resistors probably not as good as metal film resistors. For some purposes, not as good as wire wound. There are grades in quality. Are the differences worth what you pay? I don't know. I mean, hell, metal film resistors are only, cost like 10 cents a piece. So, yeah, that's worth it. Wire wound, I don't know. But here's where we get to the stuff where it really does matter. Let's start at the outside, the jacks. Whether it's a balanced connection or an unbalanced RCA connection, I do believe that connectors matter. Copper's better than brass. Balanced or XLR is better than unbalanced or RCA. But you can't just, it's not just a matter of connections. A balanced circuit is generally going to be better than a single-ended or unbalanced circuit. So that's part of what you're going to pay for. A balanced circuit is quite a bit more complicated than an unbalanced one. So you got to pay for that extra circuit design and components. Let's switch around to the front plate. What's your volume knob made out of? Is it sort of a plastic potentiometer or is it a stepped attenuator? What's a stepped attenuator? A stepped attenuator is something made with precision resistors matched across channels so that both channels of your volume knob have exactly equal effects and precision effects. And yeah, that's going to be a lot better than your basic potentiometer with a wafer, maybe a carbon wafer or plastic wafer that's going to wear out over time, that's going to get cruddy. I don't have any gear with stepped attenuators. I wish I did. I'm thinking of building one at some point, but you will really pay for a stepped attenuator. Let's stay on the front panel. And I've got kind of preamps on the brain. That's the component that I most covet at this time. A nice preamp. That front panel function selector, is the function selector built in a way that you're going to get crosstalk? Or is it built in a way that is consciously designed to deal with and eliminate crosstalk? And by crosstalk, I mean, if I'm listening to an LP and am I going to hear the radio? All right, I'm going to put in a CD and then I'm going to switch functions away from the CD. I'm going to crank the volume and see whether we hear it. That's the kind of crosstalk I'm talking about. This is one of my favorite albums, by the way. Black Moon, Into the Stage, classic from 1994, I believe. 1993. All right, let's hear what we should be listening for.
Hang on. You wanted to get up one song, it's not
I'm going to switch functions now. Pretty good. I'm not hearing it. Let me make sure that's true for all the functions. Oh, check it out. I've got it on phono. Phono section has a lot of gain. Hear that? Now, the volume is cranked all the way up, or almost. There we go, that's all the way. So it's not loud, and it's not even loud compared to the hiss. But it's audible. Now, if when I switched functions, the CD input was grounded, say via a mercury wetted relay, then I wouldn't be hearing that. But I am. Now, of course, CD, hearing it. Try tuner again. Tuner has less gain, so maybe I won't hear it. So I'm not hearing it on the other. Oh, I am hearing it on this one, videotape 2, video/tape 2. Interesting. Hearing it better than I did on the phono, much less hiss. So that's crosstalk. A really high dollar preamp with mercury wetted relays. You won't hear that. Again, the volume's cranked up all the way. It's not going to be noticeable at regular listening volumes. But it's there, and you might hear it. So, I would like a preamp that didn't have that issue. It's not terrible. My preamp doesn't sound like shit just because it does that. It's not something you generally notice. I mean, why would I be playing a CD while listening to some other function anyway? But it could be an issue, say, between, if I have a receiver that's got radio, then the radio's never really off, unless you have some thing that turns off the tuner when it's not in use. But typically that's not the case. Typically the tuner is always going to be on in your basic vintage receiver anyway. That's one thing. And then, it just goes all the way through the component. That quality, the decisions that are made about construction and materials and design and so on. When you're paying a lot of money, you're paying for decisions that are not made in the direction of cost cutting. You're making for decisions that are made in the direction of quality in general. And you can cry snake oil with respect to this thing or that thing. And you can say that they're just trying to rip you off, that they're just trying to get rich off your gullibility. And that's just not true. It doesn't mean that everything that costs a lot is worth that much more. It doesn't mean that quality and great sound always correlates with cost, but people don't make hi-fi stuff to get rich. They just don't. They get into it because they have a passion for it. I mean, hell, let's go back. Advent made speakers to make money. What did they want to sell? Refrigerators? But it was going to cost a lot to invest and get into building good refrigerators and to make money there. So in the meantime, they started selling speakers. Hell, you want to get to a company that was just trying to make money off hi-fi, go to Advent. But nowadays, it's just not a thing. There aren't enough people nowadays who buy hi-fi gear for that kind of decision making to make sense. People aren't in it for the money. They don't want to be poor. Okay. Nobody gets into this wanting to be poor, but they're not in it to rip you off. They're making decisions in favor of quality. They might not always be the right decisions, and those decisions might not always be worth the expense, but they are making those decisions in favor of quality rather than cost cutting. That's what you're getting when you go to the high dollar gear. That's just the way it is. And we can all argue about whether this decision made in favor of quality was worth the money that it took to achieve that. But that's the decision making that we're paying for when we pay a lot of money. Let's consider a case in point that I recently had. I recently borrowed my friend Chris's Origin Live Strata mat. And I put out a video about this, the fact that, yeah, there was a little bit of a difference that I could hear on my system, but it wasn't a big difference. Well, recently I had Chris over. He took his Strata mat home with him, but before he did, we tried it together, listening to my system. And after the first test, he jumped up out of the couch and he's like, I got to hear the other one again, and I can't remember whether, I think it was, I went from the Strata mat to the stock rubber mat, which is on there now. And he jumped up and he's like, I got to hear the Strata mat again. Because there wasn't very much difference. And the difference that he heard wasn't necessarily in favor of the Strata mat. Now, I think on some of the things we tried, it was the first track on side 3 of this album, Trouble Will Find Me by The National. It's the most Joy Division-y song of theirs, Graceless. It has this bass line. With the Strata mat, that bass was a lot cleaner and quicker and gruntier. Whereas with the rubber mat, it had a bit more reverb in it. And so bass with the rubber mat tends to be a little bit muddier, has a little more ring to it. But with some things, that wasn't a bad thing. In addition, we mixed in the iFi iPhone 02 and the EAR 834 clone. The difference in preamps was on a par with the difference in the Strata mat, probably more pronounced than the difference between the rubber mat and the Strata mat. And that's important because that Strata mat cost $400. Actually, kind of a comparable price difference, really, probably between something like this and the iPhone 02. A new iPhone 03 will run $1,000. 834 clone, I don't know, prices are all over the place. The differences were kind of similar and were not simply a matter of difference in quality, were kind of, on some level, down to taste. What did you like? And different among tracks, whether one was better than another. That doesn't mean that the Strata mat is made to rip you off, because on Chris's main system, the difference between the rubber mat and the Strata mat was very clear, very pronounced. But that's a high dollar system. So, here's a rule of thumb. Don't spend $400 on a mat for a system that costs under $1,000. And I'm contemplating buying a relatively expensive preamp. And if and when I do, I'm going to have to think about the other components in my system and whether I'm able to hear the benefit of that preamp with the components that I have. As much as I love my ADS speakers, I could probably do better. I know that's sacrilege for the ADS cult members out there, but, these are not the best speakers in the world. I like them a lot. I plan to keep them, but maybe not forever. There are a lot of components in hi-fi for which a wide range of prices exists, from phono cartridges, turntables, friggin' connectors, speaker cable. Got some world's best speaker cable here to try out. Those speaker cables cost a lot more than what I have, and those are relatively low-cost speaker cables compared to what you can pay, say for Cardis, for example. Every point in the signal path has a whole range of costs that you could pay. The real short answer on whether high-end stuff is worth it is, well, how much did your other stuff cost? How much did the other components that you're using, or how much did the other parts of your signal chain cost relative to what you're planning to spend on that particular one? It doesn't mean you need to, if I want to upgrade something, it doesn't mean that I need to just immediately upgrade everything else to the similar price point. But it means that if I want to get the full benefit out of that upgrade to something that costs a lot more than what I'm using, if I want to go from my Adcom preamp to a Mac or an Acoustic Research or a Conrad Johnson preamp, then I've got to be ready for the fact that the rest of my system might not be able to really give me the benefit of that money that I spend. And so that might put me on a path to upgrading the speakers, to upgrading the turntable, to upgrading the amplifier. That's okay. That's okay. If that's what I want to do, that's how I want to spend my money, that's okay. If that's what you want to do, if that's how you want to spend your money, that's okay. It's your money. But those of you who are saying it's not worth it, there's no way it's worth it, you can get top quality gear for under $1,000, that's a you thing. That's not down to the gear. If you make a statement like that, it may be totally true for you. That doesn't mean it's true for everybody, and it doesn't mean that you're not getting something for paying the extra money. Because you are. You're getting decisions made in favor of high quality rather than decisions made in favor of cost cutting. Doesn't mean that something that costs $20,000 is always going to be better than something that costs $10,000. But something that costs $10,000 or $20,000 is pretty much always going to be better than something that costs $100,000. That's just the way it is. Sorry. unless you paid $100 for something that was stolen. I mean, just because I didn't spend much on this system, I've got some stuff in it that I didn't spend any money on, but is very high quality stuff. So what I'm saying is that gear with a high MSRP is generally going to be higher quality than gear with a low MSRP. But I highly encourage you, if you can get gear with a high price tag for little or no money, that's awesome, right? I got my iPhone 02 for basically nothing. I got my Riga Effida for basically nothing. I got my Adcom preamp for almost nothing. I mean, I got my ST70 for basically nothing. I got my... I've gotten all of this stuff for practically nothing compared to what it's worth. I'm not just talking about what you actually pay, because the same piece of gear isn't going to be magically better if I spend twice as much money on it, now is it? That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying gear that was made with decisions in favor of high quality rather than decisions in favor of cost cutting, It's generally going to be of higher quality than the lower priced stuff. That's all I'm saying. How much you pay for it, if you can get a super awesome deal on it, so much the better. I've got some really nice stuff that I didn't pay anything for, or I paid much less than MSRP for. You know, my friend Chris, I don't think he's paid list price for any of the stuff that he has. You know, we all figure out our ways to make our budget go farther. What I am saying, though, is that the stuff, you know what I'm saying. You are getting something when you're going with the higher end stuff. You know, you just are. And I wish it weren't true. I wish I could tell you that you can't get any better than what you can get for $100 for a turntable or an amp or some speakers. But that's just, I'd be lying to you. And if you think that, I'm afraid you're lying to yourself. I wish it weren't true. I wish that the stuff made with decisions in favor of cost cutting were as good as the stuff made with decisions in favor of high quality. But that's not true. Oh well. Suck on it. No, I mean, look, I like my system that I paid very little for. I like it a lot. I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I think that's awesome. But I also think my friend Chris's system, and I think, you know, his friend Jeff's system, and I think, you know, people who do have really expensive systems, whether they paid list price for them or not, have got awesome systems that are significantly better than mine. And I can go listen to those and I can really enjoy them and I can go, wow, that's pretty awesome. And then I can come home and enjoy my own. Enjoying theirs doesn't diminish my enjoyment of mine. I'm psyched with what I've got. Doesn't mean I don't want to upgrade any of it, but I'm still psyched with what I've got. And part of the enjoyment that I get out of what I have is that I spent so little on it. That's a thing. You can have that thing, right? Along with aesthetics and cachet and so on, there's that pleasure of a bargain. And listening to it and going, that sounds pretty good for what little I paid for it. So, cheers to that, I say. And cheers to you. And I think I will just tie a bow on it and wrap it up. Wrap it up and tie a bow on it. Whatever. Enjoying me some nice wine. Probably didn't cost much. I don't know. I didn't pay for it. I don't know where it came from. If you enjoyed the video, please like it, subscribe, leave a comment. Tell me that you don't need to spend more than X dollars for the best quality. Fine. I'll listen. I'll read it. Be nice. If you're not nice, if you're rude, expect to get blocked. But if you simply have a different opinion, I welcome it. And with that, subscribe, ring the bell, share the video, do all that stuff, and I will talk to you later. Cheers.